This podcast is brought to you by Turncast. We make game-changing podcasts for fintech and financial services companies. Learn more at turncast.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to this edition of Connected. I am your host, Kyle Van Pelt, and I am super excited to be joined today by Shannon Rosic. Shannon, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, so happy to be on this side of things. Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know who you are, give us like the quick Shannon Rosic crash course. Give us the introduction on who Shannon is.
Absolutely. If you follow me on Twitter or anything like that for business, I self-identify as a pony savant, a fintech and wealth tech ambassador and evangelist, and a travel junkie. So that kind of encompasses who I am. But in terms of where I fit into this industry, I've had a really fortunate and cool career. I had no intention of going into finance whatsoever. I'm not going to lie. My background is in mass communication. So had the journalism and broadcasting background, which I always loved, and fell into this world by chance when Investment News took a chance on me as a marketing coordinator. And then from there, a lot of folks have just followed my trajectory, bouncing around from various media publications all the way to being on the service provider side of things, now back into media. So it's been a fun and one heck of a ride.
Oh, that's awesome. We're going to talk about all of those things, so I appreciate you sharing that. Way to tee it up. But first and foremost, this show is called Connected, and it's all about building better connections. So whether that's better connected technology or aspirationally better connected people. So Shannon, as somebody who interviews a lot of people, either via podcast or via segments when you go to conferences, you have to connect with them quickly and you have to make them feel comfortable. So for the people who listen to this show, I think being able to build good connections quickly is really important, whether that's an advisor working with a prospect and they want them to feel comfortable, whether that's somebody who's interviewing or several ways. So in your opinion, what does it take to build great connections? How do you make people feel comfortable easily when interviewing them and connecting with them for people you don't know?
Well, I'm going to flip the script on you here in a little bit because you were actually one of the first folks I interviewed when I was just getting going in the video scene and career. So I'm going to ask you about that in a second. What made you feel comfortable working with me in our first interview? But, you know, I will say we talk a lot in our industry about the human connection, as you mentioned, right? Even though everything is tech driven now, it still can't capture that human connection or relationship because at the end of the day, it's so nuanced. And as a baseline, I always try to build rapport by connecting through shared interests, mutual understanding, humor, and empathy, because building rapport is just so critical because it's based on trust. It's how humans connect, right? We identify shared feelings and establish that two-way communication. And rapport really develops out of meaningful conversations and willingness to embrace different points of view. So I have kind of 6 rules that I follow when it comes to building connections. And keep in mind, this isn't meant to be a checklist. Everyone is different, but a lot of these come naturally to us as is, and we don't even realize we're doing it. So number 1, you know, it's basic, but remember people's names because at the end of the day, it shows attentiveness and it, again, builds that trust. Number 2, find that common ground, something that kind of breaks down those barriers, breaks down those walls, and makes that person feel comfortable. Number 3, actively listen. You'd be surprised at how many people actually struggle with that. With so many distractions around us, I'm sure you've had conversations with people where they're looking at their watch or reaching for their phone, or maybe they're looking off into space because they have something else on their mind. And people pick up on that, right? So be sure to actively listen. Number 4, ask questions. People want to tell about themselves. That makes them feel comfortable when you're asking them questions that they feel comfortable answering. And number 5, mind your body language. Again, make sure you're making that eye contact. You have a good handshake. You're smiling. Mirror their expressions a little bit. And again, don't be looking off into space or your phone or sighing because you're trying to get out of a conversation or something. And number 6 might be the biggest and probably the hardest, but reserve judgment. You're just getting to know someone. There's no need to jump to conclusions unless they're being truly egregious for some reason. But for the most part, table any other thoughts you have, because at the end of the day, people just want to talk. They just want to have conversations and build that trust. And that's what it comes down to. Those are, again, kind of the 6 rules that I follow.
That's amazing. That was so systematic and incredibly detailed. So I appreciate that, because I think a lot of people sometimes don't know how they do it, right? It's like, hey, I just connect with people. But I love that there is an element of just natural human to human connection we all have, but following sort of those principles. Like you said, it's not always a checklist, but I love that. And I empathize a ton with the name portion. A mentor of mine said a long time ago, a name is a bridge to relationship. One of the things people most like to hear is their own name, because we're all somewhat naturally egotistical, even if we try to fight that or whatever, but we love to hear our own name. And that's really, really important. So I love that, along with the other 5 tips that you named. So that's excellent.
Oh, well, that's what makes us human, right? At the end of the day is that's our identifier at a base level. And I did promise that we'd flip the script. So I want your perspective, because that was all the way back. I think that was TD Link, right? All the way back in 2016 or 17. Yeah. And you were one of my first interview subjects, and you were a willing participant. Mm-hmm. And so I guess from your perspective, what made you feel comfortable to basically, I put you on the spot. I put you in the hot seat and said, hey, be on camera. Are you okay with this? I'm new to this. You're new to this. Let's give it a go.
Yeah. So when I think about that interaction, and obviously it's specific to being interviewed on camera and all of that stuff, I'm a relatively comfortable person, but it's sort of inherently intimidating, because you're like, this is very different. There's lights, there's cameras, there's a microphone in my face. It's not just having a normal conversation. So I remember feeling really intimidated. And I think the way that you made me feel comfortable, number one, you're really great at like self-deprecating humor. So you like immediately made fun of yourself, and it kind of put me at ease, feeling like, okay, this isn't as serious as it's made out to be with all of this gear and all of this stuff. But also, and I guess it's just a thin line here as I think about the audience. It's like self-deprecating humor is very disarming, but you also don't want to erode your own credibility when doing that.
It's a fine line. Yes.
So, you did a good job of kind of, self-deprecating humor, but also not eroding credibility of investment news or your ability as a person. So it's like, oh, this is still going to be valuable. Like, this isn't a joke. So that's the first thing I think about. You laugh very easily. And so I think that's probably the theme of how I would answer that is you took something that felt very serious and you made it feel less formal and less serious, even though it was. And I would put that out to the advisors listening to this show. I mean, we're talking about me doing an interview on camera, but when somebody comes in to talk to an advisor about their financial situation, it's very tense and intimidating and serious to them, because they sort of feel like they're getting ready to bare their soul. So how can you, kind of cut the tension, maybe do some self-deprecating humor while still maintaining that, hey, I'm going to take this seriously, but you shouldn't feel uncomfortable because we're going to help you through this. So that's how I would answer your question.
Oh, well, good to know, because nothing has changed. I still take that approach.
It's good. I happen to know, and you talked about it in the intro, that you're a pony savant, right? You have an immense love for horses. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But staying on this connection theme, as somebody who also loves to ride horses and grew up with them, there's a special connection between a rider and a horse and building that emotional connection. I'm curious for you, how is learning to connect with horses and all of that, has that helped at all with interviewing people, with building connections with other humans, or is that just like a completely crazy question?
So, a couple of things to unpack here. Number one, this is one of the greatest questions I've ever been asked. Number two, what a missed opportunity that we did not do this on horseback to really bring this all together. But number three, it's very similar to building trust with humans. You need to do the same with horses. They respond to your energy, your verbal cues, your physical cues, and it's very much a give and take relationship, along with a lot of patience, observation, trial and error, trying to figure out what they'll respond to, what makes them comfortable, picking up on their body language. So it's very similar to a human interaction. So it's taught me a whole lot. I've been doing it almost my whole life, and it's always been my outlet and escape. But to put it in context of the human connection, I've never thought of it that way. So I'm glad you asked that, because as I thought about it, I mean, man, it's almost identical. It's very much that delicate balance and dance of how far can I push this? I need to know when to pull back, when to push a little further. Kind of similar to, talking money. It's one of the most sensitive things you can talk about. And when you're approaching an advisor who usually is a stranger, you need to be able to pick up on those verbal and nonverbal cues to make sure that that conversation's going in the right direction. You're not going to spill your guts to somebody that you feel reservations about. And horses are very similar. You can just tell by their eyes, their ears, their sounds, their body language, how they're going to react to you. So not that I'm calling advisors horses or anything like that. That's not where I'm trying to go. But the relationship is very similar.
No, that's awesome. I think the biggest takeaway I hear from that, and I hear you saying as you provide this insight, is probably so many of us go on autopilot when it comes to interacting with others. We just sort of set it into, we're going to do this meeting, et cetera, et cetera. And what I hear you saying is whether it's on the back of a horse, which could be very dangerous for those of you who don't understand, if you don't have that connection, it can be dangerous, or you're interviewing somebody or for advisors sitting across the table, just don't go into autopilot. You have to be conscious of everything that you're doing, the way you're connecting with people, the way you're interacting, the way you're making them feel, and you should be reading all of those interactions as well. I feel like that's what I hear you saying.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's funny, and even though I tend to over-prepare, you know me with my interviews, I have my questions prepared, my outlines prepared. I don't always share them depending on who I'm going to be working with, because I don't want folks to sound scripted. You know what you're talking about. You know that you're an expert in that area. Just be you, be natural. I don't want it to ever feel like this rigid situation. And I just want folks to feel comfortable and natural at the end of the day. I'm not out to get anyone. I'm not out to make somebody feel uncomfortable or have a gotcha moment in my interviews by any means. That's not what I'm looking for. But I am looking for somebody to go beyond the surface level and actually give me something that's tangible, that's a good takeaway, a piece of advice, right? Not just like you said, that autopilot answer that you're kind of trained to say or whatever it may be.
Oh, I love it. Awesome. Well, all right, let's talk about horses a little bit more because I love it. So again, pony savant, barrel racer. How did you get into that? Tell us more about where your love for horses came from. Is that from your parents? Is it something that just you developed as a kid and got into? Tell us a little bit more about how this came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually been riding since I was 8, and I did not come from a family of ranchers or horse owners. We were always animal lovers, but I'm an only child. And so I always joke that I ended up with animals instead of siblings. And I fell in love with it when I was young. And I actually started out riding English and loved it. That gave me my seat, a lot of confidence, gives you kind of discipline and structure. But as I got deeper into the scene, my parents kind of fell in love with it too, and just being around the horses and understanding them. And it was much easier for them to pick up Western riding, obviously being a little bit older. So we careened down this path of, well, if I have a horse, then my parents also need horses, so we can all ride together. And it honestly spiraled from there. There was a point that we actually had 5 horses on property. Yeah, so full-blown herd. And, after a couple of years of doing hunter jumper, I was bit by the adrenaline bug, and I got into the gymkhana scene, which is basically Native American terminology for games. And that's everything from when you go to a gymkhana, you'll see things like barrel racing, an event called the dash, pole bending. So these high speed events, they're fun because you're competing against yourself and the clock. And that's it. No one else really matters. And so I always loved that aspect of it. Just loved the speed aspect of it. And it's, like I said, it's really just spiraled from there. I grew up with them in Connecticut. And when I moved to Colorado in 2017, I actually had to give it up for a little bit. And that was honestly, for lack of better terms, a bit soul crushing. And so it took me a few years to reestablish it out here in Colorado. And now I have 2 again. So I'm like, Mark Bruno, I need that bonus or raise because I light money on fire every month owning horses and I eat a lot of peanut butter. So please help. But it's totally worth it. It's my outlet. I'm totally that weird horse girl and big horse girl energy. Like most people that do know me, like yourself, identify me with that. And I am totally okay with it.
I love it. So on the show Yellowstone, they talk about barrel racers being like kind of a different breed of horse rider. Do you identify with that? Do you is that true, or are they coming out of left field with that?
So I have to laugh at that because I remember when those episodes came out and they started getting into the barrel racing scenes, and my mom called me and she was all upset and huffy. She goes, "They're calling them buckle bunnies." And I'm like, Mom, like that's very specific scene. Like, sure, if you want to, take that for what it's worth. But look, at the end of the day, barrel racers, they're intense people. They're hardcore. They work hard. They play hard. I mean, you have to be a little crazy to do what we do. I mean, you're running 1,000-pound animal as fast as you can in very small circles. And most of those horses are hot. They're very muscular. So you have to be able to control them, again, just with your body. And that is a crazy concept, but that's funny you say that because, yes, she was really upset about that. She's like, "I don't want you being associated with that."
Oh, I love it. Well, again, on this show, we try to help the audience get to know people and connect with them beyond just the industry. So I love this conversation. But you talk about, especially in the type of stuff, you got addicted to the adrenaline, how fast things move. I'm going to use that as a segue into our industry because it feels like things are moving. Feels like things are just moving at light speed with so many different things going on. And so, Shannon, you're the director of WealthStack Content and Solutions for Informa. And you all recently hosted a WealthStack conference in Florida and then the WealthStack conference out west. You have this unique perspective to be able to see all the content, all the discussions, all the topics that are going on. So from that perspective, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the big themes that you see in the wealth management industry right now?
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there. So bear with me. I will say, number one, the tech stack, as we know, is constantly changing, and digitization is the client experience. I think Ron Bolus actually said it best on one of my panels. He said, "Risk scores and model portfolios should be dragged out back and shot in the head and burned to death." And that is a direct quote. So we even put it in one of our articles, which is why I love that I sit in the tech space, because people do not hold back and they tell the truth. I think digitization is a trend that's obviously driving the requirement of personalization. So that was one big takeaway that came out of the event for sure. Another one that's really reshaping the role of the advisor is the fact that Americans are experiencing increased longevity. And then that's being coupled with the need to finance a growing share of their own care, right? I think the stat recently is around 10,000 people in the US are turning 65 every day. And the number of older adults will really more than double over the next couple of decades. And that's going to top out around 88 million people and represent about 20% of the population by 2050. So the role of the advisor is no longer about getting people to retirement. It's about getting them through retirement. And what we're finding is that the decumulation stage is much more complex, right? Obviously, advisors have mastered that accumulation phase, but decumulation is much more complicated, but it's a natural feature of retirement. It's having those advisors having to shift that mindset now of helping people get through those phases and also navigate very different risk on that side of things too. And so leaning into technology to deal with risks like, sequence of returns, longevity, taxes, spiking expenses. So you're seeing firms like Income Labs, Retirement Conductor crop up to help, advisors really bridge that gap for folks and get them through that decumulation phase. So that was really interesting to see, because that's more of like a macro environmental trend that we're seeing come out of it. And for many investors, that shift to retirement is very jarring. They've spent decades for preparing, and then they realize, oh gosh, I need an advisor just as much as I did in the accumulation phase, as much as I do, in this drawdown phase of things. And clients need information and guidance and support and access to a wide range of solutions that ultimately only advisors can really provide. That education is going to be so crucial, and advisors have to keep up. But we're already asking a lot of this. And I know you and I have talked about this a lot, because not only do they need to focus on advising their clients and doing what they do best, they then have to deal with their technology stacks and all the front, middle, and back office operations. And I quote it all the time. So thank you for letting me use it all the time, whether you know or not. But your term of the accidental CTO, that still continues to be a major issue. That's not what advisors need to necessarily be dealing with. But we're getting there in an industry. It all comes down to, and obviously I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about data and AI a little bit. when it comes to these topics. So obviously with what MileMarker is doing, you're seeing firms like that crop up and really try to solve for those challenges of having disparate systems that all talk differently to each other. And you're only as good as your worst data. I know I've said that to you before. So if your systems can't speak to each other, and if you don't have a data strategy in place, that's going to be detrimental to your growth. You have firms like Years and Bridge FT, who is using open architecture and APIs to pull together, custodial data, which really seems to be the crux of a lot of folks' challenges, right? Is being able to pull that multi-custodial data together and have it be able to create a cohesive picture for their clients. So really interesting things obviously going on in that space. And then I'll go on my little AI rant because obviously AI has been around for a long time, but we're just now starting to see true applications within our industry, right? Whether it's in marketing, people messing around with ChatGPT. We've seen folks like Orion FMG actually build out ChatGPT functionalities that they're rolling out to advisors. So a lot's happening. And I think it's really interesting that investors are actually interested in this, because for the most part, clients don't care what technology they're using, right? Like, am I having a good experience? Am I achieving the goals that I put forth in front of you? Are you helping me with that? Whatever it takes to get that done, great. I don't care what you're using. Can I access a portal and see my stuff? Great. But, it was actually a Morgan Stanley wealth management survey from May of this year that said 63% of investors would be interested in working with a financial advisor that leverages AI, which is really interesting. And obviously that number is even higher in our demographic, ages 35 to 44. I think it's around 85% are interested in working with an advisor who leverages AI. And their belief still is that AI will not replace the advisor-client relationship, but they want to know that they are up to date in using those tools. Because let's face it, our generation and lower, we trust technology a lot more. And at the end of the day, we're okay. We grew up with it. We've messed around with it. We've seen various iterations of it. And that's just become the norm. And so I think it's going to be interesting as we kind of follow and see the use cases in different types of scenarios for planning. I always say the Monte Carlo is really just the baseline for things, right? But that's changing. And AI is now being leveraged to make better judgment decisions, say, for example, around longevity. AI can take all of that on. And I think one thing that's really interesting too that we're seeing is what's coming out of AI is that next best action planning, which essentially, just for listeners who may not know, that's at a base level, just businesses identifying the most effective marketing actions to take to drive, customers closer to, or clients closer to, a desired conversion or moment in time. So, if you use Netflix, at the end of the day, I always use this example, you're familiar with AI-powered recommendations, even if you don't realize it. I think there's like 7,000 TV shows or movies on the streaming service. So it's obviously impossible for a user to find all the shows they want to watch. So Netflix does it for them, right? And it leverages AI and machine learning to recommend the right content and to the right user base. And then, it digests all those usage patterns and preferences, and it just works. But it's not just Netflix. And we've always said the Amazon effect in this industry, and Amazon also leverages AI to recommend new products, purchases. We're inundated on social media with it. More to come, but it's really exciting. So the folks who get this right and crack the code when it comes to AI and integrating that into your practice, don't look at it like a threat. We already went through this with the robo-advisors. The fear-mongering was real. We don't need to do this again. Yes, will things change? Will certain roles potentially be replaced? Sure, you have to be realistic about these things with the pace of change. But the winners are going to be the ones that again, lean into that human connection, but leverage AI and technology to ultimately make themselves and their practices better.
Oh, extremely well said. Extremely well said. And I think that last sentence really sums up too what's going on is the AI can be great for crunching the numbers. It can be great for building the plans. I just still don't believe it is going to be effective at replacing the connection that humans want. So we talked at the beginning of this about how to better connect with each other, how to better connect with your clients. What AI should do is free you up to get even better at that, to be able to be more present with people, to be able to connect with them well. A couple of things I would just add on that is, number one, there is, I think, a lot of excitement around AI, but there's also a lot of compliance concern. And so what we're seeing at MileMarker is If you get your data right and you pull it into your own data warehouse, things like that, then you can be more confident applying large language models or AI to your own data without risk of it being kind of out there at risk, which makes compliance happier. So how can we leverage AI on your data and not put your data out into the rest of the world? So that's something we're seeing in the wealth management space. And then also, I love the analogies of Netflix and Amazon and these things, because for advisors, what I would say is that works when you have huge amounts of things to process and crunch, like equities, like bond offerings, like ways you want to construct portfolios for people, perhaps even aligned with their values. So I think it's coming. I love everything you had to say on that about where it's going, and I think that was very well said. Love that perspective from what you see across the content and the trends that are coming, really cool side of things. But then getting more into your direct experience, you've been on, obviously, the media side of the business with investment news and Asset TV and Informa and all of that. But you've also been on the other side of the table where you've been at Robust Wealth, you've been at Flyer Technologies, where you sat on that side and you had to grow these businesses and you had to talk about it. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about here. But so going back to the media side, I've known you since the Gadget Girl days, which is a fun segment that you and Matt Ackerman did at Investment News. Not all of the audience may know what that is or what we're talking about. So can you quickly share the Gadget Girl story before I go into my next question here?
Oh, yes, please. Man, those were the glory days, right? So the concept of Gadget Girl, and God bless Matt Ackerman and Mark Bruno for allowing me to run with these crazy ideas. But this was something Matt and I had cooked up at Investment News. And this is really when fintech and wealth tech were starting to explode in wealth management. And we said, hey, this stuff is complicated and it's not easy to talk about or explain, especially the technologies that are much more behind the scenes that act as more of the plumbing. And I always joke, how do you take something that's the plumbing and essentially make it sexy, right? And make it sound interesting and be able to explain it, because it can get very technical. So we said, hey, what if we did these kind of fun, campy, but educational under the hood looks at these fintech firms? Come up with a theme for each one. We'll pull in taco trucks, for example, to talk about data aggregation. And so it evolved into this, think Carmen Sandiego meets Inspector Gadget. Some people don't even know my name still. I'll see folks at conferences are like, hey, it's Gadget Girl. So it has endured. I mean, at this point, It's like Gadget Grandma, but totally fine. I'm trying to find a way to resurrect it if possible. But so you'd see me running around the conference floor in a purple trench coat and a purple fedora. It was very identifiable. So came up with a full-blown persona. And that kind of gets into branding and things like that. Talk about making connections. That was very disarming for people when I roll up to an interview in a purple felt like trench coat and asking them questions about technology. But honestly, folks loved it. And it really took off and became this kind of semi-viral series within our niche of an industry. No one was talking about technology like that. No one was looking at those firms like that. And so while traditional media is great and there's a place for that, again, there's always that need for innovation and being differentiated. And so it allowed these firms to tell their stories in a fun, compelling way that made sense and helped them ultimately stand out. Because when you see a drone flying a burrito, like I did with Orchestrate back in the day, or I went surfing, I pushed you in a pool, like this. And people are like, what the heck does that have to do with wealth management or technology? Well, everything, because that's part of the context. And so it was just a fun way to be able to do something different and obviously leverage a platform like Investment News to be able to do that and have that distribution. It was a blast. I think we ended up with something like 15 episodes. I mean, heck, I did everything from rock climbing at Red Rocks, and we got involved with green screen. So, I mean, that's the stuff I love, and I'm very fortunate because I never thought in the world of finance that I would be playing dress up, essentially. But having meaningful and useful and educational conversations about things that are ultimately really complex.
Yeah. Oh, man, absolutely. Okay, so that being said, with all of that, in an industry full of like lighthouses and couples walking on the beach holding hands for marketing and branding, how to stand out seems to be a topic we should talk about. And that's exactly what this was, right? You could have gone and done more interviews with people about technology, microphone and face sort of thing, but you guys came up with an interesting idea of how to stand out. Now, for the advisors or the people listening who might not have green screens or things that are really crazy, but I would just love to hear your thoughts on how people can better think outside the box and stand out for their branding to make them grow and get attention in a really noisy world.
Sure. Well, first off, look, I love a good whimsical lighthouse motif, so don't hate on those. But no, in all seriousness, and I know you've heard this before from me, but it comes down to authenticity. Do you show up the same way digitally as you do in person? I know for me, nothing's really different whether I'm on camera or I'm just having a natural conversation in person with you, right? I'm still the same person. So obviously there's some nuance for business purposes, but for the most part, it's all about being consistent. Do you have a clear mission and strategy of who you want to be, who you serve, and what you offer? And if you're not comfortable with the medium, don't force it. Find something that you are good at, because at the end of the day, you do need to produce content. You do need to present yourself as being knowledgeable in the space. You can't just slap up a website, because at the end of the day, like you said, they're all wealth management blue, no offense, but they're templatized and you kind of know what you're getting. Like you said, the yachts or the sailboats and the holding hands, but it comes down to, do you have a clear mission and do you differentiate yourself with how you show up and your tone? Obviously, you don't want to come off as sounding too kitschy or anything like that, but you need to be yourselves and lean into that. Lean into the mediums. If you don't like being on camera, do a podcast. If you don't like podcasting, write something. But you have to have something that allows people to connect with you beyond, a face-to-face meeting or a phone call. They need to be able to access you in other capacities. And same thing for social. I know it can get difficult in our space, especially with compliance. But again, show up the same way digitally as you do in person. I always laugh when I go on Twitter because someone is always bantering about something in our space. And I know our FinTwit space is very expressive. We have a lot to say, but that's what makes this industry so unique, is that everyone does have that opinion. And so it's a matter of harnessing that into something constructive, right? Being able to showcase that personality in an authentic way that doesn't feel forced. I mean, yes, you need to have all the standard things that go into a marketing plan, obviously. And I think it was actually Aaron Klein who said it best to me at Jolt this year. Even though the markets were down, don't stop investing in marketing because that is going to continue to be your growth engine. It shouldn't solely rely on referrals and the advisor having to be everything to everyone. Like, invest in marketing, have a plan, have your vision, have your mission, and show up consistently.
I love that. All right, I'm going to put you in the hot seat really quick.
Ooh.
You didn't know this is coming.
Oh, boy.
But if you had a financial advisor practice today and you were trying to reach out to all of these people who are now retiring, right? You shared the statistics earlier about, hey, there's more people retiring. You got to figure out decumulation. Lots of people are targeting retirees in the financial advisor space. So if you had a practice and you wanted to stand out to those people who are retiring and looking for help on the decumulation phase and they want an advisor, what would you do from a marketing or branding side to get their attention?
Well, that's where you have to start thinking out of the box a little bit, right? And not be afraid, what I like to call is fail forward, because you have to try things. That's such a specific audience. So you need to put yourself out there. So you either need to be meeting them where they are, go to local events where you know that you can meet people, right? Get involved with charities, ask for referrals, build your network. So there's going to be a little bit of that boots on the ground where you're actually actively going out and meeting them where they are. But again, it's about, you really need to show that you understand them. So there's a lot of things you can do digitally now. Obviously, you have Google Ads, you can geo-target. You could do that simply around just your community. If you know you live in an area and, hey, there's maybe an assisted living home. Like, for example, my grandmother is in a beautiful assisted living facility in the Nashville area, but she's still self-sufficient. And so there's a lot of people like that are going into this phase of life that they want to know that you know what you're talking about and feel comfortable. So use those digital capabilities, all those online tools, go to events. Like, it's a combination of things, right? Geo-targeting, Google Ads, plugging in those keywords. You got to become a little bit of an expert around that, but that's why you hire a marketing team, hopefully, and the advisor's not doing this. They bring their expertise and they can distill it down. And then, like I said, you need to lean into a medium that that is going to reach them. So maybe they're not as savvy and maybe they want to listen to a podcast, or if they do want to watch a video, but you need to ensure that you have content that can reach all of them, that they can digest it how they want. So it might be a little bit of trial and error. And I think that's what people get caught up with in marketing a lot is everything is so ROI and numbers driven. And is this working? Is this not working? And sometimes, especially when you have a very niche audience, you just have to try things and be okay with that. Not everything is going to work. And I feel like people get so caught up with, oh gosh, I have this Google Ads campaign and it's not getting a ton of clicks. What's wrong? This, that, the other thing. It takes time. You have to be patient. You have to truly understand those personas, truly understand that audience, and then build upon that and understand how they like to be talked to, how they like to receive content, what makes them comfortable to basically say, yeah, here's my retirement nest egg. Now help me get through it, because that retirement conversations are already hard enough. You're basically talking about end of life, and that is very uncomfortable as is. Like, no one wants to walk into a conversation saying, I think I'm going to die on this date, so how long can my money last, right?
Yes.
So it's difficult, but in marketing, you just have to try things. That's what it comes down to. I mean, there's no pretty answer. I can't just say, hey, do these 5 things and you'll get all the pre-retirees and retirees to come on board. Like, nope. You just need to lean into what you're good at and put in the work at the end of the day.
Yeah. Oh man, that's great. There's a lot of good tips in there, and I'm sure the audience can take some of that and go build it.
Don't listen to me to build a practice. No.
All right. So final 2 questions for you as we wrap this up. One maybe a little bit heavier, and then one lighter and more fun. So I saw earlier in the year on social media that you were nominated as a candidate for Visionaries of the Year for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I mean, that's a great honor. And so I'd love to hear about how you got involved with that and how did you get to be nominated for that, and tell us a little bit about Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
Oh, you'll actually laugh because this somehow relates back to horses.
Oh, gosh.
So it actually all came about. So my grandfather, unfortunately, passed away in 2010 from leukemia. And it came on suddenly. And at the time, there still weren't a lot of options. It came on fast and furious. And then, within a few months, he was gone. And that was devastating to me. So it's always something that I have been interested in and passionate about, and just happened to turn out that my horse trainer here in Colorado survived leukemia, went through it, and he was up for Man of the Year and Visionary of the Year, and he actually nominated me. I was at a lesson one day, and he said, "How do you feel about fundraising?" And I was like, "Well, I've done it before. I'm open to it." And he said, "Well, it's for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society." And I said, "Well, absolutely." And especially after COVID, it was one of those things where I just felt like I needed to put more in than I was taking out in the universe, if that makes sense. And the timing was just right. It was a 10-week campaign. I brought in friends and family as team members, and you're essentially just trying to raise as much money as you can during those 10 weeks to go towards research, funding for patients. And it's incredible. Unfortunately, I had to miss the live gala this year because we were at our big Wealth Management Edge event, but they patched me in for a little bit, and so I could see everyone and participate that way, the joys of technology. But honestly, it was one of the most challenging and rewarding initiatives I've ever been a part of, because not only was it extremely personal, it gets you out of your comfort zone. While I have no issue joking around and talking to people, it's much different when you're asking folks for money. Right. That's, again, kind of bring it full circle here. It can be uncomfortable, and that doesn't come naturally to me because I'm also just not a sales minded or oriented person. So to go out to folks I maybe haven't talked to in a while, or I'm more acquaintances with, to say, "Hey, I'm doing this. Would you be willing?" $5 just even goes a long way. So that actually was a great learning experience, just from pushing me out of my comfort zone. And I think in total, all of the teams, we raised right under 800,000 through the campaign. So something to be really proud of. And like I said, it was just a new experience for me to be that heavily involved and have those kind of lofty fundraising goals to be attached to. But I'm always up for a challenge. I have that competitive streak, obviously, with barrel racing. It kind of all just came full circle with my personal experience, having my trainer go through it, then nominate me. So the universe works in mysterious ways, and the timing was just right for all of it.
It's so cool. I love that. Thanks for sharing. Congrats on that's an amazing outcome. Over $800,000 is really impressive. And congrats again on being nominated. That's
thank
amazing.
you.
Of course. So you brought up competition again, and I want to just wrap this up by clearing something up.
Oh boy.
We need to sort out your confused sports fandom, because you're from Connecticut. You went to school in Ohio. You live in Denver, but you're a Chiefs fan.
I am.
I have to imagine you've been accused of being a bandwagon fan at least once or twice. So I'm going to give you a chance to explain yourself and set the record straight on this Chiefs fandom.
All right. So two things. My two sports loves are the Chiefs and the New York Rangers. Again, kind of all over the map, literally here. So being born and raised East Coast, especially Connecticut, we're split between 2-3 camps. It's like Giants, Jets, Patriots. And I didn't necessarily come from a big sports family. Like, we always had it on, but my parents never had a team. I had family that were Giants fans and Patriots fans that lived in New York and things like that. And I think I was probably 12 or 13 when my girlfriends and I were running around in our Tom Brady jerseys in high school because we thought it was cool. But I never got attached to any football team. I tried to get on board with the Jets, but like, let's be honest, it was probably good. I stopped myself from going too far down that rabbit hole, but became a Chiefs fan actually by proxy through my husband, who again is an East Coaster, but lived in but lived in St. Louis through his high school and college years, and his friends got him involved with the Chiefs. And so finally, we would have all these arguments on the weekends. I'm like, you need to come to my horse shows and support me. And he's like, no, that's football Sunday. I'm watching the Chiefs. And I'm like, no, they're terrible. This was like 12 years ago, right? When they were rock bottom. And so I finally just got tired of fighting about it and just gave into it and actually started learning about the sports. I've always been an athlete. I love sports. I respect it. I know what goes into it to make a team successful. So I just love that aspect of it. So I committed to actually learning about football, got really into it. And I'm not just a Patrick Mahomes bandwagon fan. I became a fan during the Alex Smith era when they were going like 2-14 in their seasons. And so now we are where we are now. And I've been fortunate enough to go through 2 Super Bowls, and my proximity to Kansas City, now living in Denver, make the trip down. I've been lucky enough to go to a couple AFC championship games. And so just fell in love with it. I love the team. I love Kansas City, and I've just stuck with it ever since. And so now, I follow all the Twitter threads. I am up to date on all of it. And honestly, it's been super helpful just in business too, being able to talk sports. I know that sounds ridiculous, but if you can just chat about kind of like what's going on, that it goes back to our original conversation of just being human. Like, if you can just talk about those things, like, oh, all right, well, there's some common ground there. We can talk about sports. And like I said, my other love, New York Rangers. I mean, since I was little, I love hockey. I know it doesn't translate as well to TV as football does. They're kind of flip-flopped. It's hard to see the puck, but gosh, go to a game at MSG and just being part of that environment. I know the last time we won was 94, so I'm still holding out hope, but they're just a fun team. They're a classic team, one of the original 6. And, being from the East Coast too, I fell in love with them when I was young, and have just endured that pain ever since.
Well, thanks for clearing up that confusion. It's a cool story. And I'm really glad that Oh man, I'm glad you came on the show. I love the conversation. Thanks for helping people not only be able to connect better, but sharing what you're seeing across the industry and how we can grow and brand better to grow our businesses. Anything you want to shout out, or if not, where can people find and follow you on the internet if they're not already?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Kyle. I always enjoy our conversations, and I'm actually insanely impressed that we managed to connect like marketing, horses, tech trends somehow all together. So thank you for hitting on all the topics that I am passionate about and love. But if you are not following me, you can find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter at Shannon Rosic. And then I have my Well Stacked podcast. Please check that out. Those launch every Friday. you've been on it. So
Yeah.
speaking of personal branding, most people now know it as, instead of Gadget Girl, I have Stack It or Whack It. I've been slow dripping the market with t-shirts. So be prepared for that. And then everything else you can find on wealthmanagement.com. That's where we host, the rest of our content, all of our videos, all the events that we have coming up. So looking forward to seeing everyone out on the road again.
Absolutely. Awesome, Shannon. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it.